What time is he doing these?
He goes live, honestly, like 9:45, 10. So I kind of like end the workday at 5. I have a few hours of peace, and then I like tune into TikTok. I'm like,
are you guys rolling right now? Can I ask a question? Are you guys rolling?
It is recording.
Okay, good.
The shot is not totally set, so Blair's not entirely in it.
Okay, let's get Blair in it. Lean in, Blair.
Oh God. Are we like?
No, we're just hanging.
Okay,
I was like, they're getting things set up. Yeah, you can put your like
The camera's
put Cash Blair back on.
All right, cool.
You got 30 seconds.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen.
That's exactly what it was. And you've been indicted over that?
I object to you getting reconciliation.
Welcome to the Trump trials sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm here with
Rhonda Colvin.
And James Holman.
And we three have spent many a day in studios talking about breaking news, but we've never really had a day like this one, folks. The former president of the United States continues to be on trial in New York, and the star witness this week, I can't believe I'm saying these words, a porn star who told her graphic story of having sex with Donald Trump. Stormy Daniels testified and was cross-examined, went through a recross. All the while, Donald Trump sat uncomfortably in the courtroom watching, sometimes reacting to the testimony. We're going to hear some back and forth exchanges of these key moments in the testimony from Stormy Daniels based on the transcripts from the courtroom. These are moments that really could be pivotal as to whether or not this case holds together. Also today, we're going to talk with our colleague, Jorge Ribas, who's our eyes and ears in the courthouse. He's going to talk about what's sort of a surreal experience, really. And then video journalist Blair Gild will dip in to talk about what she's been spending her time doing, which is watching Michael Cohen's TikTok broadcasts. I hope Blair is getting paid overtime for this evening activity she's having to do. Plus, we'll have some big updates on Trump's other cases and whether or not they are going anywhere. More on that later, because of course, the big news of the week, the Stormy testimony in Lower Manhattan. We're talking about 6 hours over 2 days. She took the stand Tuesday. Wednesday was a day off, and she continued and wrapped up her testimony today. Rhonda, she just got off the stand as we're broadcasting. Okay, pretend your mom's not listening, Rhonda. Tell us, why is Stormy Daniels a crucial witness to this case?
And my mom is likely listening and knows all of these details because she follows these things, follows the news. But in simple terms, why Stormy Daniels matters in all of this is because she is the recipient of the hush money. So if we look at the timeline here, in 2006, she has this sexual encounter with Donald Trump. In 2016, days before the November 2016 election, she is paid money, $130,000 by Michael Cohen, the former president's fixer, so-called fixer. So her story is really at the center of these hush money payments, and we saw that the prosecution wanted to lay those details out in, nitty-gritty fashion. But that's why she's important. She is the central figure in why Donald Trump may have wanted to pay someone for their story.
You hear journalists using the phrase alleged a lot, also attorneys. So she did take money, $130,000 from Michael Cohen. There are records of that.
No dispute, yeah.
The allegations, James, are that she had sex with Donald Trump, and then the allegation in this court situation is that Trump essentially knew about the payments. Go from there.
Right. And so Trump does not stipulate that this one sexual encounter happened in 2006. In fact, he's denied it repeatedly, and he was using profanities when she was testifying and basically saying, no, that's not true. And she gave lots of details to sort of give depth to her account. Ultimately, Trump's not on trial for having sex with Stormy Daniels.
An extramarital
affair. He's on trial for trying to cover it up. And the question is, why was he trying to cover it up? And so the defense is saying, well, he was trying to protect his wife. And they've had some witnesses who have said, the day these stories ran in the newspaper, Trump said, make sure that the newspaper doesn't get delivered to Melania today.
It's like they're living in like 1950s.
Exactly. Yeah.
Melania doesn't have the internet, but don't let her see the newspaper.
It's right, you can see, but those, and so that, or Hope Hicks testifying and saying, yeah, Trump really didn't want his wife to find out about this. But then you have other testimony, including from Hope Hicks, saying, well, Trump said, thank God this didn't come out before the election. It's much better that it's coming out now than before the election, which wouldn't have impacted his wife at all. And so ultimately, the question is, what was Trump paying off Stormy Daniels to try to win the election, to try to have a conspiracy to affect the outcome of the election.
So one thing we're starting to hear some testimony about late Thursday is essentially the checks and the paper trail and things that Trump signed. But before that, the prosecution was laying out this story that Stormy Daniels has of her affair with Donald Trump. So we have access to the transcripts from the court, and we want to give you all a sense of what it's like, that back and forth, because of course there are no cameras in the courtroom. So we asked some of our colleagues to read the transcripts out loud for us. Now, a couple of caveats. This is not a dramatic reading, as in folks are not interpreting and playing the roles. They're just reading the transcripts. And the other caveat is that because these are quickly produced trial court transcripts, there could be some typos, small errors. But I want to play one excerpt that Stormy sets up what happens and how she actually has this sexual encounter with Donald Trump. And the reason why this is important is because the judge put some really strict guardrails on just how much detail Stormy Daniels and the prosecution could give. Rhonda, what were those guardrails and why are they so important?
Well, actually, early on, even before Stormy's testimony, Judge Merchan has wanted to sort of keep the jury away from some of the more salacious and racy details or any questions about Donald Trump's infidelity or relationship with his wife. He wanted to keep those things out of this and just stay on the issue at hand, which is, did Donald Trump direct or have knowledge of these payments to sort of stop some of these stories that were incriminating during the 2016 election? People might remember that the judge had also wanted to make sure that the Access Hollywood tape was not played for the jury, and instead they were just able to read a transcript, which really, may change the whole weight of that tape. But the judge seems to want to protect the jury from anything that's outside of the actual issue at hand. And he did not want to bring these things in to this week. And I know we can talk about it a little later, but he did seem to have a problem with some of the way the prosecution wanted to bring out the racy details.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we're going to listen to. Okay, this is Stormy Daniels. She's been meeting with Donald Trump. She's at his suite, but they're in it's a much bigger suite than probably any of us have ever had. But this is a dining room part of the suite. They're there for close to 2 hours when she asks to use the bathroom, and she has to walk through the bedroom to get to the bathroom. And this is what Stormy Daniels said happened when she came out of the bathroom. And the first voice you'll hear is the reading of Stormy Daniels' words, and the second voice is prosecutor Susan Hoffinger. Let's listen.
Mr. Trump had come into the bedroom and was on the bed, basically between myself and the exit.
What was he wearing at the time?
His boxer shorts and t-shirt.
What was your reaction to seeing him like that?
At first, I was just startled, like jump scare. I wasn't expecting someone to be there, especially minus a lot of clothing. That's when I had that moment where I felt the room spin in slow motion. I felt the blood basically leave my hands and my feet, and almost like if you stand up too fast and everything kind of spinned. That happened too. Then I just thought, oh my God, what did I misread to get here? Because the intention was pretty clear. Somebody stripped down in their underwear and posing on the bed like waiting for you.
So that's a reading of Stormy Daniels testifying and prosecutor Susan Hoffinger asking her questions. Now, Stormy goes on to talk about how they have sex, and we're going to spare everyone, including her parents, those details.
Thank goodness.
But she uses terms like she blacked out. Now, she made it clear she wasn't drunk, but that she blacked out, almost like she was disassociating.
Right.
And the state of mind is also important here, James. Why would she go into that kind of detail?
She's going into the detail because she wants to tell her story. And this is a cathartic exercise for her. The prosecution wants to show that they didn't want her to just say, I had sex with Donald Trump. And it would have been weird not to have Stormy Daniels testify if this is all about her in the eyes of the jurors. But the prosecution wanted to show that her story has credibility, but also that she had a story to tell that would have been super damaging to Donald Trump. If it had come out right before the 2016 election, after the Access Hollywood tape, and like, here's someone else who's talking about, Trump coming on to her, and that it was kind of in this way. This is happening against the backdrop of just last week, Harvey Weinstein's conviction in New York was it was basically overturned because the judge in that case allowed testimony about alleged sexual assaults that weren't being charged.
Because it was showing a pattern.
To establish a pattern that this was his MO. And so there is.
But the judge is saying that like prejudice the jury potentially, and so they need to limit the scope.
Exactly. And so like the Trump lawyers came in after Stormy Daniels gave this testimony that we just heard and said, we call for a mistrial. This is going to inflame the jurors. They're not going to be able, this is a case about bookkeeping. This isn't a case about sex. And they're going to think about the sex stuff now.
But not just that, James. Rhonda, it was also like the way that she described her personal experience of it was so negative, right? She's not just talking about an affair or a fling. She's talking about something that sounded bordering on non-consensual.
It did. And you could see this as something that the jury would find troubling in the way she especially talked about that she may have blacked out. She has said in interviews, and she also said on the stand, that she was not drugged or she is not claiming to be any sort of sexual assault victim. But she, and in your words, there was this sort of disassociation with the moment. So that came out. That was a problem that the defense had. And it was so interesting. On the first day of Stormy Daniels' testimony, the defense kind of stayed quiet. They did not object, really. They kind of let her, the prosecution go into the details of the sexual encounter. And then they came back and asked for a mistrial because, as James said, they felt they could not redress that testimony.
And the judge, in fact, says, you should have been objecting at the time.
Exactly. But what was so interesting on day two, when she wrapped up her testimony and was in front of the defense lawyers, they went into great detail for the first 2 hours of her testimony, going back over the salacious details, the very thing that they said shouldn't have belonged. So it is interesting that they're using that for their case as well.
So what is that?
And it was in part because her story has changed. Not only did she sign a statement in 2018 denying that this ever happened, her story has changed in meaningful ways over the years and in the retellings.
She has reasons for why that happened.
And totally, and she has
testimony.
explanations.
Right.
But if you're the defense attorney, you want
to go
you want to highlight those discrepancies, and this is standard procedure for honestly, this is standard procedure in a sexual assault trial, which this is not, but of highlighting how the story has shifted. And Stormy Daniels is trying to defend her own credibility, but it's about undermining the story that she has to tell and showing, the defense was eager in that to say, like, you wanted to make a buck. You wanted to get booked on The Celebrity Apprentice. Like, you wanted to make money off the story. And the prosecution coming back and saying, you actually haven't made money off of all this, all told, right? And Stormy Daniels saying, no,
that was a really powerful
negative
moment at the in the sort of the wrap of Thursday's testimony for Stormy Daniels, where she's like, I've lost money, essentially. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but I've lost money in this whole, since I've known Donald Trump, this has cost me more than it's earned me. But Rhonda, that's interesting that you bring that up, that the defense did draw out more of that salacious, tawdry story. Because does that make it harder then for them to say we should have a mistrial, or later, if he's convicted, cry foul, if they're using that testimony too?
Yeah, and I've also been wondering how the jury is taking that in too, going back over these details, and also some of the media reports coming out from those who are able to hear what's going on in the courtroom. It seems like the defense may have been shaming her for her line of work, for what she chooses to do, the fact that she wrote a book, the fact that, she has gone after Donald Trump on social media. They're certainly painting her as a figure that the jury should not be sympathetic toward, but is that going to, will the jury have a reverse opinion of that? There was one interesting question the defense lawyer asked her today, and it was just about the clip you just played, where she said that when she came out of the bathroom, she saw that the former president had no clothes on. The defense lawyer asked her, well, you work in the pornography industry, aren't you used to seeing people with no clothes? So it's those type of questions. You wonder how the jury is going to take that in, because that really has nothing to do with the case at hand, but it is shining a light on the fact that many people are uncomfortable with this line of work and what Stormy Daniels has built her career around.
There's some details that are not about sex that you can see why she'd talk about, because it does give like validity or almost like proof in some way, if you can fact check these things, that she was there. Like, she goes through like Donald Trump's DOP kit, or like the toiletry bag there, and sees Old Spice and
Pert Plus.
Pert Plus. So some of those details are
still on the market.
This is 2006.
I'm sorry.
This is 18 years ago.
That's true.
That's right. That is right.
That's scene setting, but that's different than talking about this like bordering on non-consensual experience.
Yeah, and again, he's not on trial for a non-consensual sexual encounter, but it does show that she had a story to tell. I mean, those are details that if they'd come out in October 2016, it was like she remembers what his deodorant was, and that made her story more valuable than just like I had sex with Trump.
So I want to play another excerpt from the trial transcripts that gets to this question that Rhonda brought up of how the Trump team, Trump's defense attorney, is trying to paint Stormy Daniels in a bad light and show, and in this exchange we'll hear that they're trying to show that she did not like Trump, that she made fun of him on social media, that really they had this adversary relationship, and frankly that she hated him. So the voices you'll hear here are Trump defense lawyer Susan Neckles and then Stormy Daniels, and again these are our colleagues reading the transcripts.
Again, that's your tweet, right?
Correct.
And it's you again saying, I don't owe him and I'll never give that orange turd a dime, right?
Correct.
And that's you calling President Trump names, right?
In retaliation for what he said to me, yes.
And that's you making fun of how he looks, right?
Correct.
So when you were asked on your direct examination if he called you horseface, you call him names all the time, right?
Yes.
You despise him, and you made fun of how he looks, right?
Because he made fun of me first.
So one of you started it, but both of you continue it, right?
Correct.
A reading from the transcripts of Trump's defense lawyer Susan Neckles' lines and Stormy Daniels talking about and admitting she really doesn't like Trump, Rhonda.
Yeah, this is what makes her a bit of a complicated witness, probably for both sides, because of this credibility issue, because it may appear she has this axe to grind. She did end today with the prosecution asking her, has she made any money from, coming forward with the allegations and anything since that 2006 encounter? And she says no, she actually has less money because she's had to fight in court, she's had to hire security. But that has not stopped the defense.
She owes Trump money because of a legal
right,
yeah.
a failed defamation case.
And the defense wanted to go further. For example, they wanted to introduce into evidence that she had been arrested in 2009 for assaulting her then husband, but she was never charged. And so the judge said, no, that's not admissible. But it was getting at this idea that she has a temper, that she has, the other really interesting moment where the defense did score some points is they were asking her about, you were out there, you went on tour to all these strip clubs around the country after your story came out. And it was a tour called Make America Horny Again. And Stormy Daniels said, I didn't call it that. That wasn't my term. And so then they go to break and they come back from break and Susan Neckles, the defense attorney, has the receipts and says, here's you on Instagram multiple times where you saying, come to my Make America Horny Again tour. And it all does sort of, even if she is saying she's net negative, it shows that she did try to profit off this. And she came back and said, well, Trump has also profited off of his brand. And there's something to that. But the question is, it's all seedy. It's all, it's all gross. It's gross. Yeah. And so how does the jury interpret that? And we have from people in the room that the jurors were shifting uncomfortably. There have been times where Stormy Daniels was trying to make eye contact with members of the jury and jurors were looking away and sort of not wanting to make eye contact with her. Trump, who has been fighting sleep for the last 2 weeks, has been completely focused and paying very close attention to what's been saying.
He was really reacting to it.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
And so that's if he's paying attention to it, the jury. This is how are they taking it in?
Right,
and they're taking in that Trump's rap too. I'm sure they're looking at Trump
as well.
Exactly.
So the last exchange that we're going to play is Judge Merchan, and this isn't a sidebar. So let me just set the stage for you. Stormy Daniels starts her testimony. She has not gone into specific details about the alleged sexual encounter yet, but she's talking about just meeting Trump and talking to him and hanging out with him. And they talk about his wife, Melania. And then they have this little exchange where he's bragging about being on a magazine cover. And she scrolls it up and swats him on the bum with it. And Trump apparently was reacting to this. So let's listen to, we're not going to listen to that anymore. That moment's over, okay? But we're going to listen to a reading of how in a morning break, the judge calls up Trump's defense attorney, Todd Blanche, and they have a sidebar. And here's what happens.
Please approach. I understand that your client is upset at this point, but he is cursing audibly and he is shaking his head visually, and that's contemptuous. It has the potential to intimidate the witness, and the jury can see that.
I will talk to him.
So, I am speaking to you here at the bench because I don't want to embarrass him.
I will talk to him.
You need to speak to him. I won't tolerate that.
I will talk to him.
One time I noticed when Miss Daniels was testifying about rolling up the magazine and presumably smacking your client, and after that point, he shook his head and he looked down. And later, I think he was looking at you, Mr. Blanche. Later when we were talking about The Apprentice, at that point, he again uttered a vulgarity and looked at you this time. Please talk to him at the break.
Yes, I will.
I will talk to him. I will talk to him. Excellent reading by our colleagues, by the way. Once again,
good.
this is not a dramatic
Right.
interpretation. This is just reading the transcripts. Again, Judge Mershon and Trump's defense attorney. So Trump was clearly reacting. And how strong of a reprimand is this? Does this matter?
This
I mean, the
isn't
jury
like
doesn't hear this.
The jury does not hear this. I mean, what's interesting is, so Donald Trump has the ability and the right to testify in his defense. And he probably will not. He has said publicly that he's going to, but it's very, 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 very risky for Trump to open himself up to have to answer any questions from the prosecution, which is why this kind of thing doesn't happen. But the jurors are watching these cues. The jurors are paying attention and taking it in. And so Trump being there, essentially being like, this is BS, and like, no, and audibly, it's in a way him trying to have it both ways, where he's like trying to deny her account, but not having to do it in a way that would force him to like answer questions about it, where he could potentially perjure himself and face additional charges for lying about his interactions with Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, the sidebar really gets at the bigger issue of the fact that this judge is really sort of struggling almost every day when we're reading the transcripts to keep order in this trial. He's dealing with a former president. He's dealing with someone who also is out there very vocally almost every day, everywhere, on the airwaves, in the hallway of this courtroom. And the fact that he can't say anything when he's hearing, Stormy Daniels talk about how he said that Trump and Melania don't sleep in the same bed. That was one of the moments where Trump, I guess, really started becoming audibly angry. So yes, the judge is dealing with that difficulty. And I will also add this did not have to do with the gag order, but I think one of the sleeper headlines of the week is that in the transcript from earlier in the week, the judge does say to Trump and his team that, the gag violation fines that we've put on you, those may not be enough. Jail may be next. And he talked about how he didn't want to do it. But we also learned from the mayor of New York City this week that the federal and local officials have had discussions about what arresting Trump will look like and taking him to jail. In fact, Mayor Adams said Rikers Island is available and ready for Trump. So this is pretty serious, that there are multiple times, it seems, in each day where the judge is trying to keep this level of order in his courtroom, but he's also up against high odds that Trump will obey anyone.
And Trump is a counterpuncher. Trump always benefits from sort of this freak show environment and atmosphere. And just as Todd Blanche is trying to control Donald Trump, the prosecution is trying to control Stormy Daniels. Judge Mershon also chastised the prosecution because he said there were details that the jury didn't need to hear. Don't go into the specifics of the sex itself. And they did ask her questions and let her talk, but
right, so they didn't ask her super leading questions,
right, exactly.
but they didn't stop her. Like she just told her story and kept going.
Exactly, and so and she had been told, and so they said during one of the recesses, during the sidebar, like, hey, like tell the witness. And there was a point where Stormy Daniels actually turns to the prosecution and says, "Am I doing an okay job? Because she's trying to like comply with clearly receiving an instruction to like watch it and like don't go too far afield." But so it does create this like sense of chaos, and the judge's job is to control the chaos and keep this orderly, keep this civil. And it's a weird dynamic because it is like a reality TV star turned president and an adult actress.
Adult films actress. There are many adult actresses in the world, James. This is an adult film.
I try not to call her a porn star because and one of the great moments of the week during the cross-examination was you're used to like making stories. You're used to creating illusions of sexual stories and telling stories and writing these things. And
because she's a director as well.
She's a director and a writer.
Director,
and she said, well, if I was making this up, this is a funny response. If I was making this up, the story would have been a lot better. And again, you don't know how the jury's taking that in. You want to be in the jury's head. Like, are they like, oh, so she is like someone who, like, you don't know. And it's like, you just can't speculate on what's in people's heads and how they're taking it all in.
One thing that the prosecution is doing is they're having a mix of like a bombshell witness and then a drier witness. But those dry witnesses, it turns out, may truly be the bombshell witnesses in the sense that they're the ones who have the paper trail. They've got the receipts, right? Hope Hicks was a close confidant of Donald Trump. She is the witness who truly saw so many things unfold. Stormy Daniels, obviously crucial to this case. But in between those witnesses, same with David Pecker, right? In between them are these bookkeepers, accountants, paper trail people who are talking about where the money came from, where it went, and what they know about who signed off on it. And that ultimately may be what's so key. I want to get us back to the question of, and this is why we played that transcript tape originally, our recreation of it, of Stormy Daniels talking about the sexual encounter. Is there a window open here for Trump's team to later go back and say this was not a fair verdict if he's found guilty because the judge didn't stop her from giving the specifics? And no one stopped her. The prosecution didn't stop her. The defense didn't stop her. The judge didn't stop her.
Absolutely. This is totally grounds for appeal. And it's really risky. I mean, what the prosecution did is risky, and they know. They decided it would be worth the risk, but they took a risk. They could win a conviction and have it struck down. I mean, it is very in the realm of possibility. I've talked to serious lawyers who don't have no love lost for Donald Trump, who are flabbergasted that they did this because they do think it puts the whole case at risk.
Well, stay with us. We're going to talk to our colleague, Jorge Ribas, who is in Lower Manhattan, who will talk to us all about what it is like to be in the courthouse. This is the Trump trials sidebar. Our colleague Jorge Ribas is in Lower Manhattan and has been in court all morning. They're on a lunch break now. Hey, Jorge, great to talk with you. I'm glad you're outside of court because in court, it's like a lockbox. You cannot talk to us. You cannot phone a friend. Tell me where you are and what you've been doing today.
Okay, so I'm right now outside of the courtroom amongst the media that's out here. I got here, I think around 5:30 in the morning to get in line. I'd been told it would be okay to get at 7, but I'm glad I got here early because the line was already like growing when I got here. And then by 7 o'clock, it was basically to the end of the block. There's a park here right outside the courthouse called Collect Pond Park. And so it was extended beyond that here because Stormy Daniels was here, obviously. So we got in line, got ushered in. We were given this kind of ticket that people were calling a golden ticket, which was just a yellow piece of paper, but basically got me into the courtroom, but unfortunately it did not get me into the actual courtroom. It got me into the overflow room that was filled with media. And inside there, they had set up 2 big TV screens where we could watch and listen to the proceedings that were happening today.
What are you seeing? What was this morning? His personality? I mean, did he look angry? Did he look, especially as his own attorneys were getting a chance to cross-examine Stormy Daniels, did he feel like, yes, like take the fight to her? I mean, what was his meme?
It was hard to see exactly like his facial expressions, from where I was sitting. I was actually kind of sitting more towards the back of the media room, and I was watching him specifically at points where it felt like it was contentious between his defense attorney and Stormy Daniels, just to see if there was like any kind of reaction. There was definitely times where he kind of like perked up and listened. Other times he was definitely leaning back in his chair, kind of his head up. Maybe it was hard to tell if his eyes were closed or not, but he definitely was like leaning back in his chair. And then he would kind of lean forward. Obviously like anytime you're sitting in a room and for a while and you're kind of moving positions around, there was a lot of that going on. I would see him like lean over and whisper to one of his attorneys occasionally.
Jorge, I'm curious about what you're seeing outside of the courthouse. We know throughout this entire experience, Trump has been calling for his supporters to join him at the courthouse or be outside. I know that the police have a park area where protesters or supporters of the former president can stay and have signs. Are you seeing anything like that outside?
No, none of that. I mean, there's the park, the Collect Pond Park, which is right across the courtroom. And I was here covering when he was first indicted, and there was a huge crowd. There was both like protesters, demonstrators. There was people who were pro-Trump and anti-Trump. I remember George Santos showed up when we were here. There's nobody here. There's one person with a sign that says, I'm looking at it right now, it says, "Convict Trump already." And that's all I see. There's no pro-Trump supporters anywhere here.
Trump's attorneys did the cross-examination, but then the prosecution got one more chance to have her on the stand. And it seems like, from what we're hearing you and our colleagues tell us, is that they were able to turn down the temperature a little bit and try to present her more credibly and get away from the sex part of the story. Did that seem like it was happening?
It was definitely heated during the cross-examination, but once the prosecution was able to talk to her, it made her seem more sympathetic. Her answers felt less combative. She was definitely talking a little bit softer, and it felt like another way to kind of get her chance to look sympathetic for the jury.
Thank you, Jorge. Really appreciate you scurrying out of the court, talking to us. Get back in there. Go, go, go. Thank you, Jorge Ribas. So, it's so interesting to hear the experience that he has to go through. We do have one dedicated reporter who is in the courtroom because she's one of those like super golden ticket holders. But then the rest of our reporters are just doing this rotation and getting there early in the morning. And this is a heightened day of interest because Stormy Daniels is one of the few major, name recognition witnesses. Another one that we're going to talk about in just a moment is Michael Cohen. Stay tuned for more on that. In a recent episode of Sidebar, Rhonda, you said that people in this case can just not stop talking. And we are here to talk about one of those people, Blair Guild, who should always keep talking.
I could be one of those people. I could be
all.
someone who doesn't stop talking. However, I am not on trial, so.
Thank goodness. Blair Guild, our wonderful colleague, has been focused on one of these people who will not shut up. Yeah. We're talking about Michael Cohen, who's expected to take the witness stand. Really could be as soon as Friday. Blair, what is he doing as he prepares for his trial? Is he in a monk-like, peaceful state, being introspective and meditating and getting ready?
Yeah, absolutely not. That would be too easy to appear in a monk-like state and meditate. Michael Cohen is actually instead the exact opposite of that, going live on TikTok from his personal account nearly every night. He's kind of taken on this talk show style element of how he's presenting himself. And these can stream from anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours. And the man loves to talk, and he loves to talk to a front-facing camera about whatever the whim is that day, whether it's the trial itself. He also just kind of muses on whatever the news of the day is, and sometimes he's just filling people in on how like the Knicks and the Rangers are doing, kind of thing.
Well, because you adore us so much, you brought us a tape to share with us.
Sure did.
Let's roll the tape.
I'm just calling in, Michael, to give you a pep talk. To not listen to all of this negative MAGA coming at you. What you lied about were things that he made you do, and you have made a full turnaround in terms of telling the truth.
Do you recognize that voice, Peanut Gallery here? Rhonda James, do you know who that is?
Rosie O'Donnell.
Oh my goodness, really?
Rosie.
It's Rosie O'Donnell, actual talk show host of a different era, coming on, calling in to say, Michael, I'm here for you. Here's your pep talk. And really, she's of the opinion that he's made a full turnaround on, I guess his vibe on the trial. And
But here's what's so crazy about this, right? Michael Cohen went online a few weeks ago and said, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stay mum, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, because I have to be a witness in a trial. He has not stopped talking, Blair, thanks to your ability to sit through it and listen. But this is so serious because in a recent order that Judge Mershon put out, where he was penalizing Donald Trump for breaching the gag order, the judge said that the witnesses, he didn't say who, but we know who he's talking about, cannot use the gag order as a sword. It's only to be used as a shield. And he wrote that if the protected party turns the underlying purpose of the gag order on its head, then they don't need to be protected by this extended order. So he's essentially potentially damaging the case, Rhonda.
He is, but you also, if you followed the career of Michael Cohen, this just fits the brand, right? He's not been quiet. He wasn't quiet while Trump was, running for president. He was Trump's lawyer, personal lawyer and fixer, but this is just sort of him and his world. And also the bigger picture too is that most of the people, it seems, who were in Trump's orbit also have a little bit of an opportunistic vibe going. They're also selling their own goods. And what we just saw, the clip, it fits everything that I've ever known about Michael Cohen. And yeah.
What is he selling? Like, what is he doing? How is he making money off this?
Yeah, I mean,
he's selling himself.
There's a financial element to this. So when you go live on TikTok, and I've done a deep dive into how you can make money off of these streams. So if I quit my job and start making money on TikTok, like maybe that's what I'll do next. But essentially, users can buy coins with real life money. They can then spend those coins on gifts to send in a live. And that could be anything from Michael Cohen in a cowboy hat. That could be...
Please tell me you brought that picture.
Oh, absolutely. We have screenshots. We have the receipts.
Yeah. He just looks so sad.
I know.
It is sad. It's weird.
It's not very yeehaw, and it somehow is a little bit yeehaw. But
So someone paid to send him that.
They
like
buy
emoji.
these coins, and they can then buy either like emojis or stickers or these sort of mask filters that go on during the live stream. And at the end of the live stream, streamers are then able to take those gifts and convert them into, this is TikTok phrasing, but convert the gifts into diamonds and the diamonds into real life monetary rewards. So essentially, the longer you're going live and the more frequently you go live, the more opportunity you have to make money, right? So when he's going live nearly every night for several hours and people are sending these things of different value, you can add that up kind of by the end, and he makes a good chunk of change probably.
Wow. I mean, it feels reminiscent of like Stormy Daniels going on the tour of strip clubs after all of that came out, which we were talking about earlier, and the defense was pressing her on, where like she is just like, he's, performing for money.
Right. But the prosecution, I mean, has to be going crazy because they're not, I mean, he's not helping them. He's hurting them. I mean, he's potentially damaging their situation because let's take it back to this. Why do witnesses, people who are about to testify, why do they usually stay quiet, James?
Because they've been asked to, because the prosecution doesn't want them talking, because it could undermine the case. It could show. I mean, we saw with the defense cross-examination of Stormy Daniels, all of the questions like you want Trump to go to jail, don't you? And she said, well, I want him to be held accountable. Yes. You said you wanted to destroy him, and so everything that Cohen is saying is prejudicial and shows that he has an axe to grind, that he had this falling out with Trump, and is just personally out to get him. And it makes so much of his testimony, which does hinge on like his version of events of one-on-one conversations with Donald Trump, it does make it look suspect.
I mean, Blair, one of the things that he said on a recent stream is Trump 2024, more like Trump 2024 years. But like that's like
Exactly.
showing that he wants Trump to go to jail.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting because in watching many, many hours of these streams, let me tell you, he frequently says, oh, I'm not going to talk about the trial. I'm not going to talk about he who shall not be named. But then, egged on a little bit, he absolutely will. So he kind of has this idea of, no, I won't do it. But then he leans into it when he can.
And I should say, I mean, it's worth all of that. He is a lawyer. He's disbarred now. He's been completely, discredited. He's a convicted perjurer. He served time in federal prison, but he's a lawyer who passed the bar in New York. Like, he should know better. And all of that will be used against him. And it could ultimately, I mean, Trump is so lucky in his enemies that, and people, Trump associates with people like Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels. And so, that's why these people are in his orbit. But I mean, it's just, it plays right into Trump's hands.
Yeah, I do think the prosecution is going to have to play cleanup because he is a witness that people are familiar with. He is a witness that has character issues. We've heard some of the other witnesses talk about their exchanges with Michael Cohen, and, they didn't really want to pick up the phone anytime he called. But I was thinking about this when you played the TikTok clip. and what Rosie O'Donnell said, and she was encouraging him to keep going. This week, I went back to my notes of when I covered Michael Cohen's testimony to Congress. And there was a detail I forgot that I found in the notes. I spent time with people who were there. They were from the public who just wanted to watch the scene and follow this guy's testimony. A lot of them felt very sympathetic toward him. And I forgot that detail because a lot of the things he said when he came with the receipts, when he said he was going to tell all about the president, people, wanted him to tell all and to take Trump down. And I wonder if there is going to be an element of that within the jury where even though Cohen is flawed, he still is someone who might be resonating with the jury as a fixer who's just coming clean, even though he has his own sins.
Right. And there's definitely an element of him here trying to redeem himself. He has a podcast, Mea Culpa, My Fault. He is going live on these streams and kind of talking trash about the president. So there's kind of this element where, he's trying to communicate to an audience a clear change of heart. And I guess it's going to be a crucial factor for the jury to consider.
Such a good point, Blair. Argyle, thank you so much.
Anytime.
Come by anytime.
No problem.
So is this the only trial of Donald Trump before the election? And this is such a weighted and loaded question because if he wins the presidency, he can make a lot of these problems go away. He can't make Georgia go away, but it seems almost inconceivable that a sitting president would somehow, or someone who was about to become the sitting president would be allowed to go on trial. Let's get an update on where things are at. Judge Cannon in Florida has taken a date off the books now to get things moving in that trial. I mean, Rhonda, there's a lot of conflicting, questions about just what she's doing. Some of this, she says it's because it's so complicated. But there's a lot of criticisms that she may be out of her depth here.
Yeah, this announcement this week about her postponing indefinitely this trial, the classified documents federal case, it was sort of a non-surprise surprise, and it's because many people, people who watch courts, political observers, everyone has wondered what type of judge she is because, A, she is one of Trump's appointees when he was president. She is also, it is very key. She also made a lot of moves early on in this case. Even before she was randomly chosen as the judge for this case, she tried to intervene and keep federal officials from examining some of the classified documents that were removed from Mar-a-Lago. And another judge overruled that and said she overstepped. So there have been a lot of question marks around this particular judge. So a lot of people were thinking, well, this just confirms everyone's suspicions about her either maybe not having the level of experience. She's fairly young and did not have the usual type of background for this position before receiving it. And then, just all the choices she's made before have raised so many questions. So, yes, we do know that this case has been indefinitely postponed. She has basically put a lot of pretrial hearings in motion from here on out and has not set a date for the actual trial to begin.
Classified documents cases are always really hard. They're always intensive. One of the things Trump says is, well, I'm on this other trial. I'm on trial in Manhattan, and Todd Blanche, his defense attorney in Manhattan, is also representing him in Florida. And so the Jack Smith lawyers have said, well, you could have chosen a different lawyer to represent you. And this is just about a delay tactic. And then Eileen Cannon, the judge, saying there's so many motions that haven't been settled that we can't schedule a date. And it's like, well, it's you who haven't, but it's also you. It's Eileen Cannon who hasn't made decisions on those motions.
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is this is the strongest case by far of the four against Trump. It's I was talking to a Republican member of Congress earlier today who was saying it's pretty cut and dry. This is the worst case against Trump, and it does seem like this is going to get pushed past the election. And if Trump wins, he will order these charges dropped, and the January 6th charges in D.C. as well, which are also sort of on ice.
I'll also add this too. This week marks the 6 months until the November election.
Oh my gosh.
So the fact that we are right here,
check.
exactly, just 6 months ahead of Donald Trump possibly winning the presidency again, it is a real concern among some people that voters aren't going to be able to get information from these cases. There was one thing that I heard from a Republican voter. This has been months ago when I was in Milwaukee for the first RNC debate. And I asked him about, are you concerned about any of these cases? And he, said, oh, Georgia, that's, weaponizing the judicial system against Trump. And he had other things to say about the January 6th, but it was the classified documents one. He said, that's the one that kind of bothered me the most. And he said he would vote for Trump, by the way. But he said that was the case that bothered him the most because it was so cut and dry and he had questions and reservations about it. So the fact that voters may not be able to hear about this case a little bit more there, and also for, even history, this case would have set a precedent or at least cleared up and clarified what a president can and cannot do with classified documents. And,
we may not. It would have just brought more evidence to light if the accusations are true about how really classified, how really dangerous some of this information could be in the hands of the wrong people, how sensitive, that's the word I'm looking for, how sensitive it is to the United States government. And without that trial and that process, it's just sort of poof. I want to bring us to Georgia because we also saw some movement in Georgia, but not in a way that hurts Donald Trump. In fact, one could say Donald Trump has had a pretty damn good week, despite the fact that he's on trial in New York City. Talk to us about Georgia, James.
So remember Judge McAfee, who is a Republican appointee, but the judge in Fulton County, he ruled that Nathan Wade or Fani Willis had to step aside from the case. They both couldn't be on it because there was a strong appearance of impropriety and appearance of conflict. So Nathan Wade stepped aside. He's the person who had a relationship with Fani Willis, who was sort of the special prosecutor she hired. The Trump lawyers and the other defendants in this conspiracy case, this is related to trying to overturn the election, they appealed and they said, we can't get a fair trial because this was so tainted. And the appellate court in Georgia, they could have said, okay, well, we'll consider that on appeal. They could have said, you can go ahead with the trial and we'll look at this when you appeal. But instead, they said, well, we're going to pause proceedings in Fulton County until we can hear the appeal about whether the prosecution is tainted, whether Fani Willis benefited financially from her personal relationship with Nathan Wade. And so in terms of delay, that is a huge delay. We're not going to get almost certainly a decision by the appellate court about whether the case can even move forward until the fall. And then there's going to be various motions. So it does seem like a Georgia case wouldn't happen now until after the election. So it's a huge break for Trump because that would have also been damaging for two reasons. One, it's in Georgia. It's a swing state. It would have reminded people of kind of the find me 11,000 votes, a lot of that kind of stuff. And two, that trial would have been televised before the election. You would have had video, live shot of Trump sitting there as people, Republicans like Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, were talking about him trying to overturn the election. And it now seems very unlikely that that's going to happen before November.
So all eyes back to New York, and the case that was described as the runt of the litter is the only one that's moving forward at a pace. Well, drop us a line. Let us know what's on your mind, what you think about all of this. You can send us a note, and the email address is sidebar@washpost.com. Of course, subscribe to the Trump Trials newsletter. It's golden, great headlines, as well as great content for our Trump Trials newsletter at the Washington Post. And subscribe to our podcast and vodcast. You can watch us on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com/Washington Post, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, subscribe to us there. I'm Libby Casey.
I'm Rhonda Colvin.
And I'm James Holman.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks especially today to our team that read the transcripts for us. I want to just give a shout out to Peter Stevenson, Lauren Sachs, Blair Guild, Amber Ferguson, and Ross Godwin. See you soon.